Thank you everyone for joining us for this webinar, Yanni, a case study in lighting, a show in the odd corners of the earth presented by Bud Horowitz. My name is Mallory Misnarczyk and I'm the project manager here at Harman. Just a few things before we get started. Everyone on the call is muted to keep down noise levels during this webinar. However, there is a Q&A function where you could submit questions to the presenter and I'll try to answer as many as possible at the end. This webinar will also be recorded and a link will be made available a few days after this presentation. We do have a number of other webinars taking place over the next few months for audio, lighting, video, and control. We encourage you to take a look at the different webinars and our Learning Sessions workshop series on pro.harman.com, as well as visiting Harman Professional Training to see our many on-demand and certification courses that are available to you for free. And now I'd like to introduce you to Bud, the presenter for today's webinar. Bud is a lighting designer and lighting director who has spent the last 40 years lighting shows and events worldwide. Some of the artists he has toured with include Devo, Kenny Rogers, John Mellencamp, Styx, Natalie Cole, Stevie Wonder, Carrie Underwood, Bette Midler, Brian Setzer, and Yanni. And now I'll pass it over to you, Bud.
Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, everybody, depending on where in the world you are. I'm really quite humbled to see people from all over the world coming in to watch this. So again, my name is Bud Horowitz. I'm Yanni's lighting designer, and we do shows pretty much everywhere in the world. I've done about 40 years of touring, corporate and special event work, some television. I started working with Yanni in 1997. At that time, Yanni had just finished doing shows in India and China at the Taj Mahal in Forbidden City. And for a new tour, he hired Peter Morse as the lighting designer. Peter called me in terms of lighting director. And then I worked on that show with Peter's design from 1997 till I believe 2005. It was a fairly large arena show. And in 2008, Yanni did a show with vocalists as the primary focus for the first time. Neither Peter or I did design that show, but they called me in 2010 and asked me to redesign the show so that the show could fit in theaters, smaller than an arena rig, and also with the purpose of being able to take the show a lot more internationally. And to that effect, they cut back the size of the orchestra to make it more manageable. And we started doing shows all over the world. And what did I have to think about in doing that? Well, I had to design a system that fit into most US theaters and also would translate into international venues. The international venues were going to range from small theaters to stadiums, basically. So it had to be a system that was small enough to be intimate in theaters and fit, but also big enough so that it would look large and have a presence doing arenas. I pretty much stayed with straight trusses because in playing theaters, if you have other than straight trusses, you get into all sorts of issues with being able to fly pipes and masking in and out. And it just makes it a lot easier and faster when you're doing one-nighters, especially in the US touring. And I tried to keep the system to a fairly small amount of types of fixtures because of some of the places we played, there just isn't that much different equipment available. And I wanted to try to keep this manageable. And the point is to, no matter where we are and what available equipment I have, to make that show look fairly consistent, not necessarily with exactly the same looks, but with more of the same feel. And since I program the show and carry a show with me, this show is really a lot about timing. And I kept the fixture selection, as I said, pretty generic. I was looking for a hard edge light, a wash fixture, an LED fixture to wash the orchestra with, some beam lights, some large format LED fixtures for effects, and some LED battens for the backdrop. And our plot has really transitioned a little bit in the last 10 years. Originally I was using park hands for orchestra washes, and I really found that the amount of time taken in hanging those every day and focusing them was problematic, especially in some of the international stuff. And Yanni's show at this point is between 12 and 16 musicians on stage. Yanni, one vocalist, and the rest all playing musical instruments. There are very, very few vocals. In fact, I think there's one song that's primarily vocal and some background vocals on another song. So all of my cueing is really based off the music. And I can't tell you how many hours I have just spent listening to songs to try to learn them, because I'm not by profession a musician. I can't read music. And Yanni's music can be really complex. Some of the time signatures come from classical, from jazz, from rock and roll, and they can change during a song. The show runs for 2 to 2.5 hours, and it's very, very timing sensitive. With all the music and all the cueing based on music, if something is off by a beat or 2 beats, it looks wrong. And to that effect, I have approximately 2,000 cues in the show. Some of those are link cues or move in black kind of cues. Most of them are manually triggered. I do not do anything with time code. The show's completely run manually. We do generate time code on stage, and we've talked about triggering, but with going to having different rigs pretty much every day, to try to go and readjust timing for different kinds of fixtures would be really problematic. I just don't have that time on a day-to-day basis. Most of the time, especially in the international shows, there is video involved. Not so much display video, but IMAX screens. So it's really, really important for me to be very conscious of key lighting on both Yanni and on the band members for solos. I spend a lot of time looking at Yanni's key lights every day. I do carry key lights for him, especially when he's sitting at the piano. So on each side of the stage, I have a 10-foot high tower with a hard edge light on top of that. And the only purpose of those lights is key lighting and backlighting Yanni at both the piano and the keyboards. So again, that video elements of it are very important. Here you can see what we send out as part of our rider in terms of what I ask for in terms of equipment. And it's the same basically as what we use in the US. I almost never, if ever, get exactly that lineup of gear. Every now and then, somewhere like England or somewhere where there's a lot of production elements available, I'll get something very close to that. Generally, we send this out, I get a list back of what they're suggesting in terms of substitutes for a lot of those fixtures. Sometimes I have a choice, sometimes I'm told this is what's available, period. So it can be a bit of a challenge even just to go through all that stuff. And here's a copy of our lighting plot. Basically 3 straight trusses and a bunch of floor lights, and then a truss to hold our drapery as a backdrop. We use some silver textured drapes at the back with a black scrim in front of them, so that if I don't like the drapes themselves, I get a little bit more of a rock and roll look with the background going pretty much black. Again, this lighting plot is what we send out for the world tour. It's exactly what I use in the US. And again, on a good day, I get something close to that. Here are some pictures just from the US tour. And you can see, like in the upper left, that's Red Rocks, Colorado. And some days, if there's something really interesting behind the stage, as opposed to hanging our backdrop and taking the show out of context to the venue, I'll just light that backdrop, and I'll use the same lighting that I would have been using on the drapery, and so that everything already is pretty much programmed, etc. If you look at the picture below that, you can see with no lighting on the backdrop how we get more beam pictures, and you see a little bit more of a rock and roll look. The middle picture on the top is from Radio City Music Hall, and you can see the red backdrop behind it, as you can in the picture to the far right, where I can get a lot of feels on that backdrop, not only by using my LED battens, but I've got a couple of moving LED fixtures as well that can do slashes and movement and color changes on it. So when we take this show internationally, what do I need to do to find out what I'm going to get and what we're going to do in that venue? Well, the first thing we'll do when I get a call from our tour manager or production supervisor about booking a show is what kind of venue is it? Are we playing a legit type theater? Is it an arena? Is it an outdoor stage? Is it somewhere where we do metric or imperial measurements? My drawings all have all the dimensions in both metric and imperial, and I actually have a separate riser drawings for risers that are in meters or risers that are in feet and inches. What's the overhead structure like in the theater? Are there pipes? Can they hang trusses in there? Is the stage surround basically built of scaffolding, or are we in a situation where there's no overhead? Sometimes that happens. I also look at the site layout for outdoors. Where's the stage sited? What's behind it? What's access like to it? And are there any drawings available? If it's a theater, is there a CAD drawing? Sometimes I get actual CAD drawings, rarely. Sometimes I get PDFs, which is more usual. Sometimes I get hand drawings with just dimensions noted on it. In which case I've got to really try to figure out, because I do spend a lot of time doing an accurate CAD drawing for that show. What type of fixtures do they have available? And once they give me a list of fixtures, I always have to ask if they're real or if they're a copy. If they tell me they have Sharpies, are they real Sharpies, or are they a copy from China or from somewhere else in the world? And if it's a copy, send me the DMX layout, because I can't assume that it's the same as the real fixture. And that can be an issue. I mean, trying to figure out how to get lights to work on a day-to-day basis. And then I also try to talk to them about their control and DMX layout. Usually I'll let a local vendor do all the DMX layout, because when I was a head electrician, I always wanted to be the one to do that. I wanted to know how my DMX was laid out, what was controlling what, et cetera. So I rarely, if ever, will do that for a local vendor unless they really ask me for it. And then what's their control like? Are they giving me 5-pin XLRs at the front of house? Are they giving me an Ethernet snake? Where does that Ethernet snake go to? I run into a number of places where they've told me it's ArtNet. I get there and it's run MANet into MA processors. And since I carry a whole hog console, there can be some major control interface issues. Before I leave for that event, I will do a full CAD drawing with whatever information I have. And that will show the exact location of our riser layout. And it'll show all of their fixture types substituted for mine. Where I locate those risers on stage depends on a number of factors, including where the PA hangs. So I always ask them to show me where the PA points are. I can't get the risers too far down stage, or it starts to get Yanni's piano sound in conflict with front of house PA. I'll then, if I have time and I get accurate stuff from the vendor in terms of fixture types, I'll actually sit down with my console and do a fixture swap in my patch. And again, if I have more time, I will actually do a previs to see what I need to adjust. Different fixture types, I'm going to have to adjust gobos, I'm going to have to adjust color. Depending on how that fixture homes, I may need to adjust pan and tilt offsets. There's all sorts of little things that I can try to get done here that's going to save me time on site, because there's never enough time on site. We've done this show in approximately 55 countries other than the US. So we really range from Yogyakarta, Indonesia, to London, to Madrid, to Buenos Aires, to all over the Gulf, Qatar, Bahrain, Oman, Kuwait, Egypt. So it's a real interesting day to day. Every day is very different, and certainly every venue is very different. What do we carry with us? Well, I carry my front of house lighting consoles. We own some older now Hog 3 consoles. I keep trying to swap those out for Hog 4s. It's just a cost factor, and we own 2 full sets of everything. We carry all our front of house audio consoles. We carry all of our backline, including a grand piano. We carry all the wardrobe. We carry chairs and music stands because we found those to be a real issue getting anything to match in a lot of theaters. We carry a full monitor system. There are no wedges on stage. All of the band and Yanni are on ear monitors. And the orchestra actually has little Avion mixers so they can adjust their own levels and mixes. And then we carry backdrops. We carry a black scrim and some textured silver drapes that hang upstage of the black scrim. All of our gear for any one set fits in a 40-foot sea container. We have 2 of those. Generally, one of them lives in Los Angeles and one of them lives in Rotterdam. And the reason we have 2 sets is because the cost of trying to air freight that much equipment, if we don't have time to travel it other ways between venues, is prohibitively expensive. It was cheaper to actually buy a second set of everything and have it available than it was if we had a show, say, in South America and a show 2 weeks later in, or in Europe. The cost of air freighting that stuff is just crazy. So we have 2 full sets. My consoles are identical. Whenever they are back in the U.S., I try to go do maintenance on them, make sure everything's up to date, etc. What types of lighting systems do I encounter? Well, there's a lot of them. My favorite ones and the easiest ones, I guess, are when it's a system that's based on the lighting plot I sent them. So we're playing a theater, we're playing an arena. Basically, it's my 3 truss plus a scenic truss system. That's certainly the easiest for me to deal with. This really all I'm doing then is swapping fixture types and touching up my focuses and color, etc. And that's assuming that the fixture types that they have are ones that I have profiles for and that are real ones, not copies of someone else's fixtures. And that when I get on site, I actually find that the fixtures are what they told me they were going to be. I've had instances where they've told me one thing and I get there and they'd swap them out for something else. Some of the shows we do will be like an outdoor overhead roof. And it's, again, my lighting plot with whatever local fixtures, but we don't use a backdrop because of what's behind the stage, whether it's a historical monument, a natural occurring, scenic element, or whatever that I'm going to light or the locals are going to light. So we don't want to have a backdrop in the way of that. Sometimes, occasionally, we'll have a system with no overhead trusses or pipes. And that's usually something for a really specific scenic element behind the stage. And we've done that occasionally. Certainly we did it when we shot the show in Giza at the Pyramids. We did it not that long ago in Yogyakarta, Indonesia, at a historic temple. And that really required a redesign in terms of not having any overhead trussing. So I really had to move all the stuff that would normally be overhead to the sides. I kept my fixture numbers the same and had a lot of thoughts about how I would translate that. And I was able to basically just move everything to different places and then redo all my focuses so that all the timing and all the basic cueing tracked through. Sometimes I'll have places like the Great Hall of the People in Beijing or Kremlin Hall in Moscow, where they've moved some stuff around for me, but there are a lot more of those fixtures available. So instead of having 6 hard edge lights on the back truss with the back pipe, there might be 12. So then I need to put some thought into, okay, what do I want to copy as what, so that I'll still utilize those fixtures and they'll already come into the show with existing timing, colors, focuses, etc. And then I just have to touch up all the focuses so that I build something that's cohesive out of them. Occasionally, we'll go into somewhere that has an existing lighting system, and it's not at all anything like what I've asked for. So at that point, I don't really have the option of bringing something in or having them move stuff around. So I have to take a hard look at what they have in-house and what their layout is. And then I'll start by printing out a layout of their fixtures and penciling in what I want to call specific fixture numbers based off of my plot. And then I'll see what else there is and see what I want to copy as those or replicate as those fixtures and again, try to make it work where I'm really just making it all work by adjusting my focuses, because all of the color and everything should already be in there. It's very time intensive to do that. It's really difficult to do without doing previs. Sometimes I don't have that option. Sometimes I just have the day of the show to make that. So I really try to put a lot of thought into how I do that and how I reconfigure everything in my show. And here's a couple of pictures. These are from Sharjah, a beautiful new amphitheater in Sharjah, which is right next to Dubai, United Arab Emirates. This is an example of an overhead roof, my lighting plot with no backdrop. And you can see why right across the water there's a beautifully lit mosque. And that became, sort of a focal point. In a situation like this, you can see that ring of lights way in the background on the floor. They had offered me those lights to add a little more depth, which I took them up on. And what I did was I just substituted those lights in my patch for what normally would be lighting my backdrop. So I had already had the color in there, et cetera, and it was more a matter of adjustment than adding new stuff. I really didn't have to add a lot of new things or reprogram too much in the show. Here's another example of that. I'm sorry about the quality of the pictures. This was for a video shoot in Puerto Rico in front of the El Morro Fort, which is a national park. So there were all sorts of issues dealing with access to things, and I actually put fixtures up on the wall of the fort, which took a lot of dealing with bureaucracy to be able to do. This one was particularly difficult only because the weather was so poor. And every afternoon, as soon as it started to get dark enough for me to program and focus, the wind and the rain would pick up and they'd have to bring the roof structure down to head height. I think I had maybe 2 hours of on-site programming. This was, I think, a 14 camera shoot for PBS. So it was amplified, the difficulty. I did add quite a few fixtures to light the wall of the fort, to light off the top of the fort, etc. I think I ended up, the night before a rehearsal that we shot, I took my console to my hotel room and basically programmed from there with that. I didn't have any previs at that time. In addition to that, I think a number of the fixtures were being used for a show in the arena, and they didn't get there until I think 11 o'clock at night, 2 nights before the show. And of course, once they did show up, there was a lock on the door of the truck that nobody had a key to. So all these little things just add up, and it makes life very interesting, to say the least. There were a number of other issues with that show. It was just really difficult. Just a whole lot of time and not much result from it. Here's another one with no backdrop. This is a palace in Vadodara, India. It was owned I think by the richest Maharaja in India. You can see on the right how brightly that palace is lit. And I always thank goodness when they actually take time to light an element carefully. I think that's the standard lighting that lives there mostly. And then what we did was at late one night, I got with the local lighting guys and we turned stuff on and off until we found a level where it would always be visible, but it wouldn't overpower the stage lighting. And you can see in the 2 pictures of the stage that it's definitely there, but it's a scenic element. I think we pretty much left it. They didn't have a lot of color changing capabilities, and the cost of bringing stuff in, the cost of time of bringing stuff in to light a structure that size was just out of the question. So we found a look that worked on it and just let it sit. And I think it was a gorgeous element. Another one that we did, this was an interesting one. There was a show in Guangzhou, China, and it was a very large stage. The stage had actually been built for the 2010 Asian Games. And the stage could actually be flooded to a depth of, I think, 1 foot in water. They sent me a DVD of the show, of the venue to look at, and the DVD was from the 2010 Asian Games. I clicked at a random point in the DVD, and the picture I saw was a ship sitting in water with jet skis circling around it. And I went, huh? The stage is very, very large. There were 8 large fold-up LED screens on 100-meter tall towers behind the stage. The lighting plot that you see, all of those fixtures are just things that I added for that show. The 4 trusses in the back were actually hung from the towers between the screens. The semicircular ring of fixtures at the back was just added stuff to try to fill this enormous space. And then they had some sky tracker type units that I put on the ground left and right. And I can show you some photos of this show. And you can see those huge screens. There were some fountains behind the stage that I think they were about half a kilometer in length of those fountains. They also had been put in for the Asian Games. They were all lit by quite a number of city colors, which they did not have the interface for. They had no idea how to control them. They just could turn them on or off. And you can see from the pictures how our little 40 by 60 stage with a roof in the middle of that huge expanse, you can see why I started to add some fixtures just to try to fill everything in. The picture on the lower right with the kids' chorus is something that was by the way, that I found out day of. All of a sudden, we're going to have a children's chorus come out at the top of the show. So it was, oh crap, here we go. It's always those little things. I actually loaded this show in 2 days prior to our actual show, at least the lighting gear they had in place. And we had a show 3 nights before this show in Shanghai, China. And then we flew to Guangzhou the next day. I went and programmed that night and the next night just for all the additional fixtures. Some of them just didn't work in terms of me subbing them for some of the fixtures I had in the rig. So I had to basically go through and program a bunch of that stuff from scratch. When we did the show in Shanghai 2 nights before, we were told that our equipment, our 40-foot sea container, wasn't going to be in Guangzhou for a couple of days because it had to go by truck. And at that point, they didn't have any other lighting consoles that I could use. So we had to get my lighting. My lighting consoles had to be air freighted the next morning to Guangzhou, so they would be there for me to program. And the local production guys came out and they got the lighting consoles from me and said, you'll see these in Guangzhou tomorrow night. I'm great. I went backstage, I looked out a window, and my sight, as I see all 3 of my lighting consoles on a little TikTok being pedaled away to somewhere. And amazingly enough, they did show up in Guangzhou the next day. I thought I might never see them again. It was a very, very odd little thing to see looking out the window. The next thing we'll talk about, there's places where we had no overhead structure. And the first time we did this was for a DVD shoot at the Pyramids in Giza. There were a number of elements with that show. So if you look at the lighting plot, you can see that everything is from the side, aside from a few floor lights behind the band. And as I mentioned, this was a little bit of a challenge to program. I had to spend a lot of time thinking about how I was going to do that and what fixtures I was going to substitute for what. And I do all my drawings in Vectorworks. The beauty is that it's very simple for me to draw everything in 3D. So if you look at the other picture, those are actually side elevations so that the local vendor could see exactly how I was laying all that stuff out. When I first got the call about this show, it was not going to be any video involved, and then it was going to be just IMAG, and then all of a sudden it turned into a 17 camera PBS shoot, which was very special. So luckily the local lighting vendor out of Cairo was very, very good, and he used this as an excuse or as an opportunity to buy a bunch of new fixtures. So when he got back to me, he told me that he was going to have 24 brand new Martin Viper Air Effects and 24 brand new wash lights, which is great. So they were also Martin fixtures. They're fixtures that I knew. There were fixtures that it would be very easy for me to work with, certainly. The pyramids themselves, they told me that there was some light on them, but really the only light on the pyramids and the Sphinx are lights they use for a sound and light show that they do. And when they have those lit and are talking about them, nothing else is on. And as most of you guys know, lighting levels are relative. as soon as I illuminate a stage for television, there's not going to be enough light on those. So we ended up, there was a bit of a delay in terms of people okaying dollars, et cetera. I couldn't bring the fixtures that I wanted to from the States. We ended up bringing some Falcons from Germany, which were great lights, except they basically got stuck in customs and we didn't see them until a day before we shot the rehearsal. So we got them in at the last second. You can see what some of this rig looks like. You can see the side trusses, et cetera, on the left, and on the right, a little bit of a close-up. The local lighting vendor really surprised me, and they really did a great job. Their guys were great. Everything worked. The patch sheet that I got was accurate, which is amazing. Sighting the Falcons to light the pyramids, and you can see the one right behind the stage. It's actually probably at least 1 kilometer back there. And then there was another one off to stage left or our right. Excuse me. So when these Falcons arrived, I was a little bit concerned because when I looked at the specs on them, because of the nature of the lamp and the reflector, as soon as you zoom out enough to get a large enough wash out of them, you start to get a ring of light because of the way the reflector and the lamp are. And I was a little bit concerned about that, of being able to get enough of a spread out of them. And I wanted to try putting a couple of them right behind the stage and shooting them at the pyramids. They're 7K lights, 7K xenons. They're very bright fixtures. It was difficult to sight them only because at each site that these lights were placed, we needed to have a generator. We needed to have DMX repeaters. And the fixtures weighed, I think, 400 pounds a piece. So I went with their suggestions as to where to place them. When we finally did fire them up, we did see rings. So we had to spend a lot of time refocusing and cross-shooting different pyramids to try to get enough coverage on them without it looking like an ad for the Olympics. 5 rings interwoven together. And here's a few photos of what that show actually looked like. You can see the lighting we ended up on the pyramids was actually more even than I expected. I did have a couple of nights, I think, of programming the rig, and I did do a lot of previs on this. So all of the pyramids were all lit with the Falcons, the Sphinx. I actually had I think I had some Roby points or something along those lines on the floor behind the band that I was able to spin around and get the Sphinx. All of the pyrotechnics on that show, the fireworks, were actually done by the Egyptian military because nobody in the private sector is allowed to have explosives. They actually did a pretty good job. They actually did listen to the music, and they did pretty well. I mean, the timing on the fireworks was pretty good. One of the interesting things about the site there, when you stood behind the stage and looked out toward the Sphinx, there was a large open area, and there were a lot of dogs running around the area. And one day I was sitting back behind the stage on a coffee break, talking with a couple of my crew members, and we look over and we see a dog walk out in this open area and start wandering around. Well, this dog ended up, and we actually have a picture of it, walking out to the middle of this. And if you look at the close-up on the right, there's a coffee can sitting out in the middle of this open area. And this dog actually walked around for about 20 minutes, went over to the coffee can and pooped in the coffee can. I've never seen anything else like that in my life. It was quite amusing. And somebody actually thought to get a picture of it. Another area or another place that we did a similar rig to this one was at the Prambanan Temple in Yogyakarta, Indonesia. And this is a temple dating back to, I believe, a long time ago. I don't remember the exact date, but it's an ancient Hindu temple. And again, it was another similar thing where we did side truss structures. The structures, because of available equipment, were actually different. I basically told the vendor what I wanted to do. They sent me some drawings of the structure. I laid those into a lighting plot. And as you can see on the right, because of the fact that I do everything in 3D, it's very easy for me to generate drawings. I think our production team wanted to see some 3D drawings of what the structure would look like around the stage. So it's relatively simple to do that if I'm careful in the way I draw the show. And again, it was really finding out what they had available and making that gear work for my show. I added, I think, 8 beam fixtures on the back corners of the stage that I was going to replicate some of my other beam fixtures on the ground. However, I was told that I didn't need to worry about lighting the temple itself because it was well lit. Well, the lighting for it basically consisted of some 1,000-watt floodlights a couple of 100 feet away. So it really didn't do that much in relation to the stage. You can see a picture here of what it looks like. You can see the lighting rig. You can see the temple towers behind the stage. Luckily, I had added some beam fixtures on the floor. I ended up having to spin those around in order to light the temple. I thought about duplicating the color in those from my normal cyc lights. I ended up not doing that and just keeping them lit in white. I just thought it made a great backdrop. This show actually was not as difficult as it could have been. Again, I'm actually getting pretty constantly amazed at the quality of what I'm getting around the world, both in terms of the gear and the crews. It used to be I would either get great gear and a crew that didn't have a clue because they really didn't do that many shows on the scale, or I'd get great gear, or I'd get crappy gear and a great crew who's used to making that crappy gear work. And if I had my choice, I'd much rather have the crappy gear and a good crew because at least stuff works. I'll get into that a little bit more later. Another example, and sorry about the quality of this picture. This was the People's Hall in Beijing, which is where the Chinese Communist Party does all of their events and meetings. They don't do that many shows there. They reconfigured their system for me a little bit. When I first talked to them through a translator, of course, I was told that their trusses in the air could move to wherever I want them. So I, of course, went and did a drawing showing the ideal position of the trusses for me. And I got an email back saying, well, they can move wherever you want them as long as they don't move more than 1 meter, which really didn't help me much. So they basically reconfigured and rehung some of their stuff. There were a lot of additional fixtures. So instead of having, 1 pipe or 2 pipes with 24 orchestral wash lights, I had 3 pipes with more fixtures. I had more hard edge lights. So I basically sat down and went through again and reconfigured and thought out, what I could best duplicate to make that lighting plot work. What compounded the difficulty in this show was that these were all Chinese manufactured fixtures. Some of them I just couldn't find a correct profile for anywhere on any of the high-end sites. I look at fixture share online. I looked all over the place for something that was similar that I could adapt. That's difficult at best of times, especially when you don't have a fixture in front of you. I think the biggest problem I had was all of their front of house fixtures, of which they have a lot, and they had more than enough for me to do what I needed to do. We built a fixture for them. I got on site and I got no level out of them. So I spent half of my first day just trying to get those to work. And that really becomes an issue. I mean, I just don't have the time to do that kind of stuff. And unfortunately, with the age of my consoles, their manufacturer no longer supports building new fixture profiles. They pretty much made it so you can only get that done for their newer consoles. Unfortunate, but I've gotten much better at building and modifying fixtures than I used to be. The next one I'm going to show you, this is a venue. It's the old Roman amphitheater in Carthage, Tunisia. It does not have any traditional lighting positions. There's a couple of side trusses and a couple of levels of stuff at the back. So they sent me a drawing, which was pretty rough, of what positions they had available and a list of their fixtures. And their fixtures weren't bad. I mean, if you look at the plot, there's some Mac 2Ks, some Mac 3s, some of the NIC NRG fixtures, some DTS fixtures. So they were mostly real. It was a matter of I knew that the show wasn't going to look like our normal show. But again, what I had to do was try to work with their positions and the fixtures they had available to try to give the show the same feeling, and to try to make it so at least the timings were correct. Because with a show that's all musically based and musically cued, the timings are really, really important. And I have to, play enough with the fixtures that I'm given to know that I can hit that go button at the right time, whether that change needs to happen on a beat or whether it needs to fade into that change. And I was actually quite happy with the way it came out. Here's a couple of photos. So it's a really different looking show for Yanni, but I was quite happy with the look and the feel. I think we had done a show 2 nights before in Beirut, and then we flew into Tunis the day before. I went into the venue at, I think, 10 o'clock at night and programmed till, I believe, 6 in the morning when the sun came up, and then went back and got a few hours of sleep. It was just a lot of adjustment of focuses, because nothing was really similar in terms of positions to what I'm used to, or to what I usually get. And I also, another example of somewhere where it's really not my rig. This is a new venue that was built in Al Ula, Saudi Arabia. It's out in the middle of the desert. And the area of Al Ula is known for its rock formations, etc. It's one of the areas, it's near Medina. It's one of the areas where Lawrence of Arabia was running around trying to disrupt the railways that the Germans were building to get to Mecca. And basically they built this venue. It's actually the largest mirrored building in the world. It's quite striking. It mirrors all of the stuff around it, as you can see in the photos. And it was basically the design of the building and the lighting plot and the audio and the staging was all done by a design firm out of Milan, Italy. They did a great job, really nice people, very competent, very talented. So they basically sent me this plot. I went with their stuff in the air. I had them add my floor lighting, especially the towers I have on the sides, because those on the top of those are my hard edge lights that I use for Yanni's key lights. Here's a couple of pictures of that show. Again, I was quite happy with the way it came out. I was able to use all of my existing programming for the floor lights, and then I was able to adapt what they had in the air to my regular programming. What you can't really see in these pictures is behind the stage is all glass, and outside are these huge rock formations. Unfortunately, the contrast on those you can't really see. The rock formations, I kept those lit in one color, just to have a feel and the depth of it back there. Here's a couple more pictures of shows that we did in different places. Beirut, which was basically my regular lighting rig. And the center in Costa Rica, we actually did a show with a large stage built in the middle of a large stadium there. And because of the scale of it, I added a whole bunch more beam lights on the side torms and a few other things. I think I added some diagonal trusses in the back, just to fill the space a little more and to give a little bit more of a visual picture for people sitting in the stadium stands quite a ways away. The last photo is down in southern Mexico. I can't remember the name of the town. It's a very famous monastery and church that was built there. They don't do very many shows there. And again, it was a local lighting vendor that did a great job. It was a pretty cool feeling place only because of all the architectural lighting that the local guys had done around the perimeter, et cetera. So it was pretty cool. It was another one that was pretty fun to do. And then this was the last show that we did. This was March 15th, before pretty much the world shut down. This was possibly the last arena show in the world. I mean, this was in the arena, in the Mexico City arena. We had a few shows scheduled after this. We came home the next day. So I don't know of any other large-scale shows that were done in the world pretty much following that. What do I do? What do I think of on a day-to-day basis? First of all, I need to go in and patch all my gear, or patch the local lighting gear, and make sure that all the fixtures work, make sure my profiles are correct. God knows how many times I've gotten there to using a profile for Sharpies, and I get there and I patch it, and the fixtures start flipping out because, oh no, these use 18 channels instead of 16 channels. So I've got to go in and either put in a different profile or modify the one I have. My first step, once I have everything working, is to do all of my basic focuses, all my wash focuses, all my beam focuses. And I then look at all of Yanni's key lights. Basically his front light and his back light at the piano. I do the same thing for the band, using all my hard edge lights from the front truss to do all my band key lights. And then I'll try to step through the show and I'll look at all the timings and colors and gobos and make sure all that stuff tracking through from my usual show. I'll take a look at the local follow spots. How bright are they? How many of them do I need to use on Yanni, etc.? Can I get away with putting color correction in them? And then I'll take a look at the local video setup, because they'll usually do IMAG. What kind of cameras are they using? What do they want to white balance at? So what will I adjust both my follow spots and all my key lights to in terms of color temperatures? And then I'll go back and I'll meet the local video director and the shader. Most important to me is the shader, because he's going to be the one setting the white balance and adjusting both levels and contrast and colors, of what's going to the screen. So it's really important for he and I to be on the same page in terms of what we're doing. Usually one of our guys will go and sit with the local video director during the show. He'll talk to the cameras before the show. He'll tell them what kind of shots we're looking for. Sometimes that works out great. Sometimes the local video director just decides that, they want to do their show, and it gets a little frustrating for some of our guys. What kind of problems do I have on a day-to-day basis? Well, I have follow spots that are terrible. I have operators that don't speak English, which is fine as long as I have a translator to do that. The translators that are usually provided sometimes are translators they get from companies that do translating for business. That doesn't at all equate to what we do. They don't understand the terminology. Usually, if that's the situation, I'll just deal with the lighting guys directly. There are certain terminologies in lighting that are universal: DMX, profile, fixtures, universe, or something that most of them understand. And I'm running into very few places where the lighting crew speaks no English. Sometimes the fixtures I get are not what they told me I was going to get, or the profiles I have are incorrect or unavailable. That just eats time like crazy, or they give me a patch sheet that doesn't really equate to what's in the air because somebody made a mistake, or the equipment doesn't work. They'll tell me everything was tested. I'll plug it in and I can't get stuff to work properly. The control interface can be incorrect. I can get there expecting 6 universes of 5-pin DMX, and they give me, an Ethernet cable that's going to some unknown protocol, and I've got to go suss out what's going on back in their dimmer world. There's just no time to get any of that stuff done. If we do a show outdoors, I usually get in there the night before to at least focus, because it's the only shot I have at it, because it's dark. Sometimes on the indoor shows, if we're lucky, we'll load in our stuff the day before, including band equipment, and I'll get to go focus and program the night before. Some days I don't get it till day of. The last time we did a show in Shanghai, they told me they had one thing. I got there and they actually had a copy of it with a different profile. And then I'm running back and forth trying to find internet access so I can look for a correct profile. And sometimes I'll just have to sit there and start farting around with profiles and adjusting them to try to get everything to work properly. What kind of solutions do I have? Well, I got so tired of dealing with local follow spots either not working properly, or operators who didn't speak English, or them not understanding what I'm looking for. If I call 2 follow spots to pick up a bass solo upstage right, and they pick up a male cello player downstage left, and I'm trying to get them to fade out and come back up over there, and this follow spot starts swinging all over the stage. I ended up eventually adding 2 more hard edge lights, 2 more Vipers on my front truss, and the sole purpose of those is to do solo pickups. So I have all of that programmed into my show. They're preset in position. They do pickups along with the cues with the correct timing. etc. It's really important to me to have how much pre-production I can do. Some places need it more than others. Some places I get a list of gear, and they'll actually do a CAD or a lighting plot showing my plot with their fixtures, which is great. Sometimes I've got to do so much work of reinventing the wheel. It really depends, but it's really important for me to be able to do that. I try to do a CAD layout for every single show we do. It's easier now when we're doing shows that are a little bit more spread out. The first major international tour we did was a different country almost every day, and trying to do the pre-production and drawings, for that show, and I'm on the road, is really difficult. If I have enough information in advance, I really try to do a previs for every show. It's important to me to get as much information, at least in terms of the fixtures in there and the basic focuses and colors. The last few shows we've done, for the first time, we actually started bringing an L2 with us. So I have another lighting guy with me. In the past, I've never had a lighting guy with me. So I've basically dealt with the local vendor and troubleshooting all the issues. And it's just, the time just goes crazy. As I said, I carry whole hog 3s with me. I've had issues with interface where I'll get places and they have an MA system, an MA net, and it becomes an issue of them having to get some ArtNet processors or whatever. So now we actually carry a high-end DP8000 with us. So if need be, I can go up to 16 universes because I have a super widget, and just plug. I can always put that backstage and just plug DMX directly to that. It's really important to understand time management. Most of those days, I just don't have time. I really have to prioritize everything. What do I absolutely need to get a show done? I have to have my basic focuses. I have to have all my key lights. If I don't have time to step through the show and do all my timings, that's fine. It's not ideal, but it's okay. Programming is really important. The way that programming is laid out, everything really, really needs to be palletized if you're going to do shows with a rig that you have and programming you have, and you're going to take this and use it with other systems. Whether you're on an MA, a HOG, an AVO, a Shamsys, an Onyx system, you can always do pallets. I can't stress how important that is in being able to translate your show into other systems. And some of the little details, when you do auto palettes in any one of these consoles for a specific fixture, you're going to get, Gobo 1, Gobo 2, Gobo 3, Gobo 4, Gobo 5, Gobo 6. When you're doing Gobos or you're doing Zoom, use palettes for that. And maybe if there's a Gobo 2 in your US show or wherever you are locally, is a breakup Gobo, label that on the palette as a breakup Gobo. So when you get into a different fixture where that Gobo you're going to use for that, instead of the breakup, is not in that slot, you can just update that slot and then everything is going to track through properly. If you're using RGB LED fixtures, I really would suggest programming those with intensity and color as opposed to using RGB intensity. What can happen is if you have those in your show and you get to a system where you don't have LED fixtures, then none of your color is going to translate across. None of your color programming is going to translate because those fixtures don't have an RGB intensity element to them. And those parameters won't do anything. And then you're going to have to go through and redo the color, for all of that stuff. Again, programming properly is really important. The most valuable thing is pre-production. You really need to know, what you're walking into as much as possible. To walk into something where, I sent them all this stuff and they should know, that's not going to cut it. Your artist or whoever you're working for doesn't want to know that your show didn't work because you didn't do your homework. It just eliminates so many problems to do the pre-production and to do the CAD drawings, because the graphic representation is the same in any language. When I send a drawing to Egypt, or I send that to Lebanon, or I send that to Buenos Aires, they can look at the drawing and they're going to get it. or at least something close to it, or at least enough to ask questions. I find the best representation I have of how smoothly a show is going to go, or how smoothly a setup's going to go, is the kind of questions I get asked. I can usually look at the questions I get asked and know how much they really looked at the information and how experienced these people may be. So communication's really key. Again, I get involved from the time a show is booked. The pre-production work is really done. Our production manager really deals with things like dressing rooms and catering and transportation, and our tour manager deals with hotels and all of that stuff. The other person I work with on the production-related stuff, stage production, is our production supervisor, who's also one of our audio guys, Anthony Stabile. And really, whenever I will deal with the staging and the risers and that layout, how that stuff is sited on stage, all of the lighting and truss structure. Anthony will look at the PA specs. I'll work with them because I need to know where the PA is going to hang. Where I locate risers and piano really is it's one of the primary elements to determine where that stuff goes, is where the PA is. When you do shows in theaters in the U.S., the first thing I look at in the morning is where are your PA points, because that's going to determine where our 0-0 is, which will determine where trusses get rigged, where the risers start, etc. So overall, it's really an exciting thing to be able to go do shows in some of the places we do. It's really a challenge. I've really learned a lot about working with this stuff, about some of the programming tricks, etc. That's really it. I mean, I really think I've covered as much as I wanted to cover. If anybody has questions other than what you can ask now, please feel free to email me. I'll be happy to answer anything I can. And I'd like to thank Martin Harmon and Laura and Mallory and Brad and Heather for doing this series, which I think is great. I'm a watcher of this series as well as a participant, and I've learned a lot and will continue to. You got some great people doing stuff, and it's great for people to be able to take advantage of learning from some of us who do a lot of this all the time.
Thank you, Bud. This was a great presentation. So we do have some questions if you have time.
Sure, please.
Perfect. The first one is, it seems often your shows are recorded, video productions. How much does this influence your design choices?
I pay a lot more attention to video. Even when we do the shows on our iMag, we always record them. So I know that Yanni's and his management is going to be looking at those later on. So I always pay a lot of attention to video. When we're shooting the show for a PBS special, I need to pay a little bit more attention to the balance between Yanni's lighting, the orchestra lighting, and especially if we're somewhere like Pyramids or the Prambanan Temple in Indonesia, I need to pay attention to a lot of the balances between backdrops and stage. In a live show, I would be more concerned about how people see it and what it is to the eye. And the majority of the IMAG shots that we're going to see are more close-ups. We're not going to show that many wide shots of the stage if it's just IMAG, because somebody sitting in the audience can see that without the video screen. So it's really more about paying more attention to balances, to lighting the audience. I'll probably light the audience more if we're taping it for a PBS special or whatever. And it's really more about knowing what the camera's going to see than just what the eye sees.
Perfect. The next question is, for Yanni, are there preferred or banned colors?
There are no banned colors. There are really no preferred colors. I've really been pretty much left up to my determination as to colors for songs. I don't remember Yanni really ever coming to me, especially since we started doing these shows in theaters and stuff, and saying he didn't like a specific color or something. When we were doing shows in arenas years ago, he was a little bit more hands-on in terms of looking at everything and listening. I think he trusts us, which after 20 odd years, you would hope so. So I really don't, there are no band colors. I really get not that much input from him in terms of color. The input I got from him, or the things he notices, are more timings during songs, especially on solo pickups, and especially when he'll notice if I fade out too quickly at the end of a solo. A lot of times, if we'll go from one solo to another, I will put a delay on the fade out of the prior soloist light, so that it really lingers for a moment, so Yanni can gesture to them or they can get applause even while the next solo starts. So colors really are pretty much me, and I can't tell you how I decide what color works with a song. Most of the time, I'll listen to music, and colors pop into my head. In fact, I've said to Yanni, you see color and hear music. I hear music and see color. Sometimes I don't know. Sometimes I can listen to a song and not know what it needs to look like. Sometimes it pops right into my head. When it doesn't, I'll sit there with previs and just listen to the music and just play with focuses and colors until something clicks. Sometimes it takes a long time.
Great. The next question is, how much of your lighting crew travels with you versus using local crews?
Until very recently, none of my lighting crew traveled with me. I did everything pretty much myself on site. When we did the pyramids, I brought somebody with me, which was great because we had such a late start with lighting the pyramids themselves. I was able to give him control of the pyramid lighting on a separate console. And recently, we started bringing the guy who's my head elect on my U.S. tours from Delicate, Spencer Smythe, now comes with us usually. It saves me so much time because a lot of times I'll be out at the console and have issues with fixtures, and I've got to run backstage and find the local guys and get them to look at stuff. And all of a sudden a half hour is gone out of my day. So recently we started carrying somebody. In the past we never have, and it's made for a lot of rather hectic days for me. Hopefully those are gone.
Great. The next question is, you have delivered so many breathtaking shows in the most unusual locations in the world. There must be different challenges every day with logistics and language. So how do you keep your cool and maintain the show must go on mentality? Maybe less coffee, more green tea?
More coffee. It really depends. As I said, time management is the big thing. What I've gotten really good at is assessing what the issues are going to be beforehand. I can usually tell, and again, I can't stress enough pre-production. I usually know beforehand where the problems are going to be, or at least I'm able to deal with things that I know are going to be issues before I get there, because stuff always comes up on site. It never fails, any of these shows. So if at least I've dealt with things or thought out things that I knew were going to be issues, it'll leave me some more time to deal with things on site. Long ago, I get very nervous, and I get not nervous so much as just, I have so many things to do at the same time. And it becomes just all about priorities. What do I absolutely have to have? When do I need to stop dealing with that so that I have time to deal with the essentials? I don't yell very much. I think there was only one show on all these international shows. It was a total train wreck where I was yelling at locals. It was in Istanbul, and the local vendors just didn't know. Nothing was patched right. Nothing was cabled right. What they brought me was not what they were supposed to bring me. And I started yelling. And even as it was by showtime, I had some orchestral washes and I think 5 moving lights working. Luckily, my orchestral washes that day were pars, so we can always figure out something to make those work. I really don't get upset, I don't think, as much anymore. And a lot of it is again, I've dealt with this so much that I've really learned how to prioritize. And having somebody now travel with us really helps me immensely, because he'll just go deal. He knows the show. He knows me. He knows, is able to absorb local gear quite well. So that helps a lot.
Perfect. The next question is, do you ever completely rebuild your console file based on evolving program styles or new techniques you learn along the way?
Every now and then when I have time, there's a lot of things that I take mental and written notes on that are things I want to change that I can't really do on a one-off, especially if I've got that one-off with locally provided gear. I program everything new in the show based on my U.S. touring rig, and then so if I know we're doing a show in Madrid and I have the list of local gear and I know there's a new song, I'll program that new song first on the US rig so I have it there. And that way, when I translate it across to different fixture types, I'm not losing any of my original programming, etc. Every now and then, I will flush out my console and reload software and reload my show. And every now and then, I have little projects, as I mentioned about the RGB intensity thing with LED fixtures. I had a lot of stuff programmed with RGB intensity. And when I had a couple of weeks at home, I have one console that lives at my house, and I'll actually sit here with Previs, and I went through the show and reprogrammed all of that stuff to intensity and color, so that I have that next time I have to deal with fixtures that don't do RGB intensities. So I try to do that. I can't really do anything new software-wise because my consoles are old, and there is not now and never will be any new software for them. If I ever get to upgrade my consoles that we tour with to newer versions of my consoles, then I probably will spend quite a bit of time at home taking advantage of some of the new programming stuff that I can do on them that I can't do on mine.
Perfect. The next question is a three-parter. What is the intensity of your follow spot? What is the distance of your follow spot to the target person? And how many follow spots do you prefer to have?
Okay, well, the distance really depends day to day. If I'm doing a stadium, those spots might be really far away. If I'm doing an arena, I would say the distance in an arena is probably 200 to 300 feet. In a theater, it might be a lot closer, it might be 100 foot. And again, it depends. Intensity, I usually look out of the follow spots for about 60 foot candles or so. And it's really then a balance of what kind of spots they are, how far away they are, and what their intensity is as to how much I can color correct them. If I'm getting if all I can get is 60 foot candles out of that follow spot without color correction, then I'm not going to color correct them, and I will adjust the color temperatures on all my other key lights to match that. Ideally, I like to color correct my spots down to about 4,300, so I have CTO in them, and then I will go ahead and adjust all of all my key lights to the same thing. And one of the reasons I do that is an uncorrected follow spot to me just looks a little bit harsh on camera, and this just softens everything a little bit and brings out flesh tones a little bit better. What was the third part of that question?
Yep. How many follow spots do you prefer to have?
I always ask for 4. I use 2 of them on Yanni, and the spots on Yanni likes spots on him all the time, so those spots never fade. I always tell the spots when he's going from his piano to his keyboards, etc. The other 2 spots I only use on a vocalist in one song. There's one song that a vocalist comes out, stands behind the piano, and does a song. If I have a venue, say a theater, where I have 3,000 watt spots, be they Lyceum or Strong or whatever, Juliet's, very often I'll only utilize 2 spots and have one spot on Yanni and one spot for the soloist. It depends how bright they are. It depends on the angle. If they're straight on, it's one thing. If those spots are split left and right, then I'm always going to have to use 2 spots on any one person, and I'll adjust the intensity based on that.
Great. The next question is, how do you program the extra fixtures in your basic show in order to be fast in your time management?
Basically, what I do is I replicate. So if I have 6 hard edge lights on the back truss, and on this particular show, I have an additional 4, 2 on each end. Well, if my 6 lights are numbered 201 through 206, the first 2 lights stage right of those, I might label, I might copy 201 and 202, and the last 2 lights, I might copy 205 and 206. So they're always going to have the programming of those lights. Now, when I go and look at a fan focus for those 6 lights, those extra 4 lights are already going to be in a focus. They're going to mimic the other 2. So I just need to adjust the focuses, and those lights are always going to track through the show in terms of color, in terms of gobo, in terms of position. It can bite me in the butt a little bit sometimes, depending on how I do that. I do spend a lot of time figuring out what lights to replicate as what. What can happen is if I have a percussion solo and I normally light that with a key light, a backlight, and 1 downlight, all of a sudden I've got 3 lights that are downlights. So I need to go step through the show and try to fix that. If I don't have time to, it's not the end of the world. But that's why I said once I get everything patched, everything working, I step through the show cue by cue and look at everything. Sometimes I have to adjust timing because a VL3000 is going to move at a different speed than a Viper. It's going to have a different gobo load. The colors, although they might be the same CMY mix, might be a little bit different. So again, with palettes, I can speed that up tremendously just by updating my palettes.
Great. So the next question is, so many foreign locations. What's your favorite front of house snack?
What's my favorite front of house snack? I have a chronic cough, so I always have cough drops out front. I tend not to eat during the show because I keep my microphone on a lot, and I think it's really obnoxious to have chewing on headset, as Brad can attest to. So when I'm programming, it's hard to say. I like having jelly beans out there sometimes. I drink a lot of water. I try not to drink too much because Yanni's show is 2.5 hours long and I'm getting old. So 2.5 hours and a lot of water doesn't necessarily mix very well. I really don't eat during the show. Programming, it depends what's available, I guess. I tend to just start shoveling stuff in my mouth if it's too easily available out there.
Great. The next question is, what previs programs do you use?
What preset or what previs?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I use Vision, which is now owned by Vectorworks. I think there are a lot of good programs out there. One of the benefits to me of using Vision is that it's a Vectorworks product, so that when I do my drawings in Vectorworks, it's a direct transition into Vision. It'll accept all the patch. It'll accept, the fixture types as long as Vectorworks has built enough fixture modes, which they're pretty good at for those specific fixtures. It'll translate directly across into previs. I've used a number of others. I think when I did Carrie Underwood's show, we did that show on MAs and we programmed the whole show in MA3D, which was fine. There's a lot of great stuff out there. I mean, Capture is pretty phenomenal. And there's some newer stuff that's coming out that's great. There's a lot of different stuff, most of which works. A lot of it depends on what you're looking for in terms of console interface and how easy that is. I mean, for me, the ability to not have to build a whole new visualizer file and to be able to just export my Vectorworks drawings is invaluable time-wise.
Great. The next question is, when you've had problems with technicians not speaking English, would you fix that or ask a translator at the location to assist?
A little of both. It depends where we are and how the translators are. There are places I've gone where when we were, I think last few times we've been in Russia, the translators we had were all fairly young women who were very production aware. And if they didn't understand a term, they knew enough to ask for me to explain that term to them. I really haven't had, I think the only problem I've had fairly recently with language was in Beirut, where the guy that I had been dealing with prior to getting there didn't show up on site until the afternoon of the load-in day. So I was trying to communicate stuff with my technicians, and it was a bit difficult. But you can do a lot with, walk out on stage and point to a light and then, point to where it needs to move to or whatever. I mean, translators, when they're conversant in our terminology, are great. Uh, Russia was great. The girls were great. I had some issue with some of the local technicians, I think, in the Kremlin, uh, who just spoke more English than they would admit to. And I would ask them things, and they'd pretend they didn't understand me. And it's funny because the girls who were our translators, the women who were our translators, were young and mostly fairly small in stature, and they would scream at these guys. And I said, "Why did you have to scream at them?" It's the only way they'll listen to a young woman. So okay, and they got stuff done. It was great.
Great. The next question is, what is in your touring toolkit?
My computer and a light meter. That's pretty much it. I mean, and then obviously we carry consoles with us. I carry a console, a wing, and a backup, and then really just a light meter and my computer. Most of what I do is in my head, not in tools. So I don't need to carry any tools with me really, because I've got local guys for that. So it's really just my light meter is probably the most important hand tool that I have.
Perfect. We have one more question. Which location has been your absolute favorite to have done a show, and why?
Probably in terms of the success of the way I like the looks, probably Carthage, Tunisia. It was a way oddball rig. I had very little time. I got on site like just before midnight, the night before the show. There were just all sorts. There were issues, not major issues. I mean, I had been dreading it a little bit when I stepped out of the car, getting on site. The local lighting tech shook my hand and handed me light right paperwork, which was great. That was probably my favorite in terms of the look. My favorite in terms of the iconic site was certainly the pyramids. As tough as that show was and as time consuming, when you're standing there at 2 a.m. and staring at a console, and then all of a sudden you stop and look up, and there's the Great Pyramids and the Sphinx. It's pretty mind blowing. Of course, when I stood at the lighting console and turned around, 50 feet behind me was a Pizza Hut and a Kentucky Fried Chicken. So there was that.
Great. It looks like we have one more question come in.
Sure.
What color temperature for camera balance do you prefer for good skin tone for Yanni?
I usually go down to about 4,300 Kelvin. I find that compliments him. He tends to like looking pretty rosy. And I have to go talk to the video guys all the time who, try to paint that really a little bit starker than we would like. And again, it depends on the day. I mean, if I have follow spots that once I throw correction into them have very little light coming out of them, well, then I've got to adjust the color temperature. And it depends on the cameras. I mean, some cameras really locally, especially on days when we have high-end consumer cameras as opposed to professional cameras, some of those cameras are just going to do better at uncorrected at 5,600. I think Yanni looks best at around 4,300 Kelvin.
Great. So a couple more came in. So the next one is, what f-stop do you prefer to work with on camera?
Boy, again, it depends on a lot of things. I think around a 5.6 or so is a good f-stop. The background will stay in focus enough without everything being too sharp. And usually, if my level's around, 60-foot candles, that works out well. I've just got to watch, what happens depending on if I have a local lighting rig with 50 more fixtures than I might have. That stage is going to be a lot brighter than it might be otherwise. So I've got to, accordingly adjust the intensity of my follow spot, and a lot of that is. It's just experience. I mean, I don't really have time to go up and meter everything all the time. I do carry a meter, a Sekonic 800 that will do intensity and color temperature. So I'm not dual metering things, which is great. And that's a new addition, so I'm still learning it. So sometimes It's interesting.
Great. So we had one comment that says Bud rocks.
Yeah.
And a lot of thank yous. So I want to thank everyone for attending today. And thank you, Bud, for this session. It was great.
My pleasure. And again, thank you guys so much for hosting all these. I've actually learned quite a bit. I think watching Benny Kirkham's programming webinar a couple of weeks ago was great. And actually, the one that Abby Rosen did the other day from a viewpoint of aesthetics and design philosophies was quite interesting. So thank you guys for doing all this.
Yeah, well, I hope everyone has a great afternoon, and thank you again.
Thanks, Bud. That was awesome. Really
Thanks,
appreciate
Brad.
it.
Good to see you. Even just a picture of you virtually.
Yeah. It was great seeing you.
Thank you, Mallory. It was a pleasure.
Bye, guys.